I just finished the first session of DavenportU Citizens Academy. Let me tell you about what I learned. We got a tour of City Hall, built in 1895, actually the second City Hall that Davenport had when it ran out of room. We went to all 3 floors. There are different divisions on every floor. First floor is HR, Revenue Division, IT, and Civil Rights. Second floor is Community Economic Development. That's the biggest department by far. And the third floor is City Administration, City Council offices, and the Mayor and Legal. That's also where the entrance to the clock tower is, and Alderman Rick Dunn is actually the one that maintains that. We got an overview of how the city government works. Davenport is a special charter city, so it was actually chartered before the state of Iowa was a state. So it has a few special things, a few special ways that it does things, specifically in the way that it takes out bonds. Now, the way that the hierarchy works is you have your elected officials there at the top. The city administrator and corporate counsel report down to them. The department heads report to them. And off to the side are all the boards and commissions with the 2 special heads. They've got Jeff Collins for the library and Latrice Lacey for the Civil Rights Commission. City council sets the policy. They set the goals. The city administrator figures out how to take those goals and bring that into a work plan. So then the rest of the staff follow that, and they help put in place city council's policies. And we also got to take a seat at the dais. So they assigned each of us to one of the city council seats. They had me in the mayor's seat, so that's not something you see every day. I got to bang the gavel. So we walked through the city agenda, how each of those categories work, why things are in certain categories. For example, public hearings, there are a few topics that are required by state code that they be on public hearings, so that there's a little extra notification, a little extra time for people to put in their 2 cents. And next week, we are going to learn all about finance. So we're going to get to talk to all those finance department staff that, handle the budgeting, they handle the purchasing, they handle the payroll, everything you can think of that has to deal with money in the city. All right, week 2 of DavenportU Citizens Academy, we learned all about the finance department. And we got an intro to some of the main funds. So here is how the money has to be divided up when the city is deciding how it has to be spent. So the general fund is kind of the catch-all. So it handles police and fire payroll. It does parks, libraries. If you can't buy something with the general fund, you can't buy it as a city. The local sales tax fund, it's divided in half. So 40% of that can go to capital projects, think like city vehicles, traffic lights, all that kind of stuff. 60% of it goes to property tax relief. That's funded through the sales tax, and it's actually under budgeted because it can really be affected by the economy. The road use tax handles anything from curb to curb, so that's funded by the gas tax, registrations, any licensing, titles, all of that stuff. So that'll handle a lot of your street projects, your snow removal, your striping, anything that happens literally curb to curb. The risk fund is like the insurance, so that handles any liabilities. If there are, workers' compensation claims, someone takes a fall, there's property damaged, it all comes out of the risk fund. The sewer fund is exactly how it sounds. It's paid for using those utility bills. So whenever you pay your sewer bill, it goes only into this fund. It can only be used for sewer things. The River's Edge Fund is another specific one. Those are the ice rinks by the Centennial Bridge. It's meant to be a self-funding fund, so all of those service fees, concessions, all feed right back into it. It's might be another few more years before it breaks even. Capital improvement projects, so those are the really big projects that can take several years. Anything more than $5,000 is going to have a 5-year lifespan. That can go into that capital improvement projects fund. It's budgeted on a 6-year timeline. The budget is only set for 1 year. The rest of it is projection. They can move projects forward and back depending on what emergencies they might see when they have funding available. And the SCORE fund is a brand new one as of January. Each elected official gets $5,000 to spend on some kind of quality of life upgrade within the city. That could be things like neighborhood facades, it could be lighting, and they can pool their money together to make slightly bigger projects. That's proposed to be increased to $10,000 for each elected official next year. We also went over the budget book, how to read that, what to find. Next week, we're learning about public safety. We're going to go to the Scott Emergency Communications Center and hear from the fire department, police, about how they do public safety. All right, we had week 3 of DavenportU Citizens Academy. This time it was an overview of public safety. So we met at the Scott Emergency Communications Center. This is where the county's dispatch center is. So we learned a little bit about Davenport Police, Davenport Fire, Medic EMS, the Emergency Communications Center. And we got a tour of one of the Medic EMS ambulances. They are one of very few government-owned ambulance services. Most of their $14 billion budget is covered by reimbursements and user fees. We also did an exercise where we had a map with a hypothetical scenario of a tornado hitting the Walmart in Davenport. You had to assign engines and police officers and ambulances to this big emergency, while at the same time there are different emergencies happening all around the city and the service area. It was an interesting look into, the kinds of pressures that dispatchers are put under, all the resource allocation they have to do, who they have to work with, and how to prioritize what to respond to and when to ask for help. Next week, we'll be getting a more in-depth look at the police department. We'll be going over there. I'm told there will be some hands-on activities, so we will find out what those are. We just finished week 4 of Davenport U. We were at the police station learning all about what they do there. Let me give you a little bit of what we learned. We started off with some of the stuff we covered last week with that intro to public safety, got a little bit more granular with who all is in the department, who all is going to be on the street at any given time. We also learned about some of their non-sworn, their staff, who they'll do evidence collection. They have a fingerprint analyst and a smaller lab downstairs. They also have bullet testing. So when you see those bullet casings, they're able to figure out what those guns are within a few days rather than, a few weeks or a month if they have to send it off somewhere. They also talked about their crime prevention and intervention programs, which they say are really important. Group violence intervention, they intercept people who maybe have been involved in gun violence and are likely to continue that cycle. So they reach out, they offer them resources, anything they need to stop them from committing that crime. They also talked about their mental health co-responder program with Vera French. They have a co-responder during the day and one on weekends. They respond to mental health crises and, they're able to better handle that situation, offer the person in crisis more options rather than, just getting arrested. We also did a tour around the department. We got to see the shooting range. We didn't go in the evidence room, but we saw the outside cinder block wall. We saw some of the offices, the training, we saw the equipment checkout room. We weren't able to take pictures in there. Went down to the garage where they had a few vehicles in evidence. One of them was a bright green sports car. We also popped in the evidence collection room behind the cage. They had, things like bicycles. They had a few generators. There was an ATM, big paper bags, a few black trash bags. They showed kind of the really clean way they catalog evidence. They put it in a locker. That locker is locked. It goes off to evidence. No one else touches it except those evidence experts. We did a few hands-on demonstrations. I'll tell you about those in another clip. Right, here's part 2 of Davenport U week 4, talking about the police department and all the stuff they do. So we had 2 different hands-on demonstrations where we took the role of police officers, obviously as people who have never done any of that before. So one of them was connecting a traffic stop. So we put on like a bulletproof vest. We had like the belt with all of the stuff on it. Walked up to the car, and one of the officers was in plain clothes. He was kind of play acting different kinds of people you run into when you're doing a traffic stop. Now the really freaky part was the other scenario. So they had people volunteer without telling them what they were going to be walking into. I raised my hands. So they take us out to a hallway. They have us wait a few minutes while they take the rest of the group into the room. We come around the corner. There is a cart of training guns and tasers and the OC, the kind of pepper spray, and big face masks. I'm like, oh my God, what did I sign up for? So the other 2 people, they go in first. And then they turn to me, they say, okay. The scenario is a bar owner calls the police because there's a customer that is getting rowdy. He isn't being served anymore, so we placed a gun on the bar. So I walk in. I have no idea what I'm doing. I don't know how to use any of the stuff. My initial idea was to get him away from the bar, and then he stepped back. And then I tried to use the OC. I didn't know how it worked. And eventually I grabbed the gun from the guy's pocket. But man, that was stressful. Just finished week 5 of DavenportU at the firefighter training facility. Let me tell you what we learned. We started with a rundown of the fire department's assets, its buildings, where's everything stationed. He talked about call volumes going up, especially in medical in the past few years. Then we did 3 different stations. My first one was with the fire marshal talking about some fire safety tips.
But you want to make sure that if you're cooking on the stove with a pot or anything, I always make sure that I have a lid around. So if you do have that grease fire, all you have to do is slide that lid over it, away from you, over it, turn the heat off, and just let it cool down.
Our next station was with the paramedics, so every company has a paramedic with them. We had a few demonstrations there. There was a machine that does CPR automatically. He had this freaky little drill that will put an IV into your bone marrow. This is only for people that are like unconscious, super dire situations. And then we got to try intubating a dummy. It is harder than it looks.
I'm serious, you just got to shove it.
And they got a little souvenir. They did a little EKG reading on me. So I have this little paper that says Davenport Fire Department now. And the last one, we got to put on turnout gear and practice holding and shooting one of the fire hoses in one of their little practice areas.
Hold it back. Yep, and hold the hose tight with your right hand.
We got a tour around one of the fire trucks and all the stuff that it has on it. All right, for DavenportU week 6, we were back at City Hall covering some of those extra departments we haven't gotten to yet. So we touched on HR, the Civil Rights Commission, IT, and Community Economic Development. HR functions a lot like it does with any other organization, but there are a few things that they have to consider when it comes to hiring for public positions. They have to put out the qualifications and do these assessments to make sure that people are qualified for the job, and then they have a set list that they can hire from, and that expires after a year. So if they're going to hire for that position, they have to pull it off of that list for a year. HR also covers risk management, so that's all the insurance stuff, but they also do some proactive things for employee health. That includes bringing in therapy dogs about once a month so that employees can have like 20-ish minutes of just petting a dog. Then the Davenport Civil Rights Commission, they handle any claims of discrimination, whether it comes to housing or credit or employment, things like that. Those complaints can come from anyone as long as the entity they're complaining against is in Davenport. We did a little mock exercise of a workplace complaint of some harassment that wasn't resolved by HR, but these investigations kind of take a long time. It's about a year if it's a pretty cut and dry case just because of the staffing levels they have. Now from IT, we got a rundown on how to spot an email phishing scam. Now, if you're in the Davenport City Council chambers a lot, you'll be happy to know they're getting their new AV equipment installed at the end of May. And finally, we learned about community economic development. So they do a few different things. They handle the housing vouchers, they handle housing development, and the general economic development. So those can be things like some property tax exemptions, some loans, some grants for small businesses, incentives for large businesses or projects. Housing development, they have a whole range of programs for renters, for improving the exterior, interior of your house. Some of those are grants, some of those are loans, but they're at a 0% interest rate. So you can pay them back little by little. If you can't afford to pay it, it sticks to the house. So once you sell it, then the city gets that money back. They can put it in a new project. And housing vouchers, they have about 700 recipients a month. Those are for foster youth that have graduated out of the system, for veterans, and for people whose income qualifies for that housing voucher. That's traditionally what you'd call a Section 8. Next week, we're going to be at the compost facility and the wastewater treatment plant all day, so I'm very excited. We're going to go back to DavenportU week 7. It was a full day where we went to the composting center and the wastewater treatment plant. We'll start talking about the compost center. So they've been in operation for about 30 years now. That's a lot longer than a lot of other compost sites last. So the big draw with the compost plant is they take all these things that normally would have gone to the landfill and they reprocess them and they turn them into a useful product. Places like the Parks Department can use them, Burlington, Rock Island, Bettendorf, all of these other municipalities also use their product along with the customers in Scott County. So they start by putting things through this massive machine, call it the tub grinder. They take these big leaves, sticks, whole trees, they chop them through and they get finer and finer bits of dirt. They might put it through again just to get that right consistency. Once it is the consistency they like, they send it over to their composting warehouse. Now, they also take the biosolids from the wastewater treatment plant that is up the road. And here are those conveyor belts where all of that gets mixed in. Now, all of that steam, that is the composting in action. It has to be at a very specific temperature to make sure that that bacteria can break things down properly and really get those nutrients going. A big reason that composting plants can get shut down earlier is if they're not doing a good job of controlling the smell. And so in 2012, they put in a new system to make sure that their neighbors aren't getting that really strong composting smell. So they use these big fans to pull air out of the warehouse. They send it through these pipes, and then it goes up through this mulch. That actually takes the air. It takes all of those organic compounds out of the air and essentially composts them again. And then all of the air that comes out is fresh. It smells clean and, not like soil. Now, the compost facility doesn't make as much money as it requires to run. It gets about $900,000 revenue. It costs about $2.4 million to operate. However, all of that material would be a lot more expensive to send to a landfill that would cost between $6 and $7 million. And in part 2, I'll tell you about our tour of the wastewater treatment plant. All right, this is part 2 of Davenport U Week 7 class. We learned about first the compost facility. Now we're learning about the wastewater treatment plant. Davenport's water pollution control plant is right on the Mississippi. Their intake depends totally on the day, the season, especially the weather. The amount of water they get coming from those storm drains and from the sanitary sewers, it varies by millions of gallons. So first up, they use some big pumps to get things into their system just to start off. They've got this big filter that will rake through the water that's coming in, and it'll grab all of the big stuff. It can be, gloves, things that people flush that they're not supposed to flush, tree branches. They've had fence posts, crazy stuff that gets pulled up through that. After that, it goes through a set of finer filters, so that grabs anything that is a little bit smaller that first rake couldn't catch. Here's a look at the water after that first layer of pulling stuff out. So this is what they start with. Then it goes outside to these big vats. So those sweeper arms, that's pulling off any of the muck, that stuff you see collecting at the top, that's grease from people's kitchen sinks. So as it goes through each of these vats, it gets progressively more and more cleared of any of those biosolids, any of that gunk. And this is what the water looks like at the end of that process. And then finally, it gets to the UV sterilization room. This is relatively new, considering the plant has been operating since 1978. So those big, long UV bulbs, they kill off any extra bacteria. And then after that UV sterilization, here's the water getting pumped right back out to the Mississippi. All of those biosolids have to go somewhere. This is where they go, in the digester. They're actually draining that one down for maintenance, but man, is that smell of methane strong once the wind hits it right. Using a natural process, the water pollution control plant is able to keep that water that's going back into the Mississippi clean. All right, for week 9 of DavenportU Citizens Academy, we visited the public library on Main Street. So I can't even begin to touch how many things the library does. It is an insane amount of programs and resources, just all kinds of things, anything you could probably think of. At the main branch, they have a makerspace where you can use all kinds of equipment, 3D printers, large-scale printers, t-shirt stuff, button makers, all kinds of stuff. They've got meeting rooms, they've got the archives with all of the city papers, all kinds of genealogical images. There's also a bunch of online resources. There's ways to stream movies and music, you can get ebooks, and you can do all of this stuff at any of the Iowa Quad Cities libraries. Also with a Davenport library card, you can check out at any of the Illinois Quad Cities libraries. They also have a mobile library that's a big old van. They fill it with books. They take it to every first grade every year. In the downstairs storage area, they have this huge plaster reproduction of a Donatello frieze. Used to be in the children's library section of the old building. There's also the automatic book sorter for returns.
So I'll show you kind of what it looks like after moving the item along. Once it gets to the top of the conveyor belt, it's going to briefly pause, gets it checked in, moves it down, and then sorts it to the location that it needs to go. So in this case, it knows where they're going. That's because I pulled them off of a display. So that's how it knows where to put it. It's going to go back onto a display. Apparently the sound.
If you're interested in looking at any of these programs or learning about all of the other programs, you can go to their website and explore around, poke around there a bit. All right, this was our last session of DavenportU Citizens Academy. I'm very sad to see it end, but we went all around Parks and Rec and we learned all about what the department does. So we started off at the junior theater facility on Kimberly. They just recently moved in here for their classes, for their rehearsals, and then the actual performances are still at Annie Wittenmeyer at the Nicewander Theater, where they've been for, 75 years. Got a cool tour all around there, got to see some of their practice rooms, their props, their costumes, their crafts, all of their stuff. They're launching a few new courses coming this summer. They're reviving the playwriting class, and they're starting a new makeup design class. We also learned about the 1 million other things that the Parks Department does, all of the programs, all of the park maintenance, AmeriCorps, just all of the different things they do to, make our parks great. There are a bunch of volunteer opportunities as well to do some cleanups, be on the Park Advisory Board, help make decisions, and that's also the best route, the Park Advisory Board, to go through if you want a new park, if there's something you want added to the park, if you want some more public art, anything like that. Best place to go is through the advisory board. Then we got on this trolley. They took us down to Vanderveer Park. We learned a bit from the horticulture experts they have inside the conservatory. And we got to grab our own little plants to take home. This is my little peperonia. Hopefully I'll keep it alive. And then we learned about the golf department. That's an enterprise fund. So all the money they make from people going to golf there, they can only use that money to maintain everything, pay everyone, do everything they need to do for the golf courses. So all 3 of those courses have seen a big jump since COVID happened, actually. Somewhere around 35% increase in revenue and in rounds played. And then we got to try out bucket golf. This is one of the new little variations on golf, kind of like Frisbee golf. You just have to hit this wiffle ball to hit these little pop-up buckets. I got one of them in the bucket. That's about as good as I did. And then we came back to the junior theater facility. We'll be getting our little certificates of completion at the next city council meeting. So I am excited to get my little piece of paper from the mayor.